Okay, so to kick off our lectures on morphology, we're going to break this down and focus on little units of morphology at a time to hopefully scaffold and bring you to a deeper level of it. So today, in this mini lecture, we're going to focus on parts of speech. You just completed an exercise called fill in the blank. So you took a word bank of English words and you plugged those words into a weird story about tacos. I couldn't think of anything better. So sorry about that. But based on this word bank, you've selected the words that fit best in each blank space based on what you thought sounded better in that space. And so you were making some decisions about why a word might sound good in that space and why one might not. And those decisions are typically rooted back to morphology, to decisions you're making in your mind without you even being aware of it that are morphological decisions. So we're going to use this word bank a lot during this morphology section. To illustrate for you what morphology is. So I'm going to constantly come back to these 12 words over the next couple mini lectures, so during this morphology series, so you can understand how morphology exists and how it helped you figure out which words sounded better in which space, how it helped you finish that story. So to cover the key concepts before we let out for spring break, we introduced morphology and we talked about how we can use morphology to study how words are made, right? What form words can take. And we started our lecture on morphology by looking at these ways that we make words in English. So we looked at this whole list before we went on to spring break. And we ended with this one called derivations. And I told you that this is the number one way that we create new words in English. So when we go into morphology, you can expect that we're going to spend the next couple mini lectures focusing on what derivations is and what we're doing with it. And because it is the number one way that we create new words, it's obviously something that needs to be expanded on and we need to dive into a little further. But we want to stop and real quick with this mini lecture today, talk about these four things on the screen: nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. I'm guessing if we were in class together, I could ask you what's a noun and what's a verb, and you would be able to quickly think of some great examples. I might even be able to put a sentence on the screen, and you would be able to tell me, yep, that's the noun, and that's the verb in the sentence. Adjectives and adverbs, most students typically don't recall what those are, but they're not incredibly complicated concepts. But still, in order to go deeper into morphology, so how we make words, how words are formed, we need to know these four parts of speech. And parts of speech is just one way of saying basically the same thing. So we could say parts of speech. We need to know these parts of speech. We need to know these word categories. We need to know these lexical categories. Some of you have heard it called lexical categories or word categories before. I'm just letting you know that whether we call it parts of speech, word category, lexical category, it's all the same thing. We're referring to nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. And are the words we're working with, are they nouns, adjectives, verbs, or adverbs? When we move into syntax, which is going to be after morphology, we're going to look at all parts of speech. So not only just those four, we're going to look at conjunctions and pronouns and whatnot. So when we talk about parts of speech, we're actually talking about lots of things, but just for morphology, we're interested in nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. So I'm going to quickly introduce you to those four things today so that you're prepared as you move through the morphology section. A noun, this is one that's typically the easiest for you to identify. I'm going to give you a basic definition. This is an object. So it's a word that's used to reference a person, place, or thing. That's a definition you guys have probably used before. Person, place, or thing. That's a noun. But I'm specifically saying it's a word used to reference something, because when you look at the sentence, it rains, think about that sentence. That's a full sentence in English. It rains. The noun in that sentence is actually the word it. And what is it? It's not a person, it's not a place or a thing. Well, it's a word that references a thing, right? It might be referencing the sky, but it is a word that references a person, place, or thing. So that's a noun. So I want you to use the definition of a word for a noun as a word that references a person, place, or thing. Okay, now this might also fit with what we know as pronouns, But again, we're going to deal with pronouns when we get to syntax. For today and for this mini lecture, and as you move through morphology, this is going to be our working definition for noun because it gets a little more complicated, and we're going to deal with that later in syntax. So a couple examples of nouns might be woman, man, or wedding. Those are examples of some random nouns in English. When you're trying to figure out whether or not a word is a noun, so you've got a sentence in front of you and you're trying to figure out whether or not a word, what the nouns might be in that sentence, here are some tips for identifying that. A noun is usually introduced by or close to an article. And articles are basically 3 words in English. That's a part of speech, right? A word category is articles. And articles are a, an, or the. Those 3 articles can introduce a noun. So again, it might be that we say the woman or the man, but we also might say the ugly woman or the ugly man, right? So there might be a word between your noun and your article, but if there's an article there, it's basically about to introduce a noun. You can tell one's coming up. Another tip for spotting nouns is going to be that nouns can take the S for plural. So we can add an S to a noun and it can make plural. Now, let's look at our example word. Our example words up there, we have woman, man, and wedding. Those nouns, the only one that can take the S for plural is wedding, right? If I want to make it plural, I can say weddings. But sometimes our nouns in English don't always take the S, right? They can, but they don't always take it. So a woman, that's the singular, right? To make it plural, we say women. The main thing I'm illustrating here, though, there are some tips and tricks for identifying nouns, but we want to basically go off of our basic definition that a noun is a word that's referencing a person, place, or thing. And again, let me stress that we're going to come back to this stuff in syntax. I just want you to have a basic understanding of it today. An adjective, simple definition, this is something that describes something about the noun, right? So in the previous screen, we used man, woman, and wedding. Those were our example nouns. Well, if I want to use adjectives to describe them, I can say handsome man, gorgeous woman, or the wedding was quiet. Look at my examples here. So handsome, gorgeous, quiet, those are all descriptive terms, right? So that fits under our definition that they describe something about the noun. Handsome describes man, gorgeous describes woman, quiet describes the wedding. The thing I want to illustrate with you here is that the adjective doesn't always come right before the noun. Look at my last example, the wedding was quiet. The adjective is actually after the verb. You don't need to remember all parts of speech right now. Again, I'm just trying to illustrate for you. When you're looking for adjectives, when you're looking for words in your sentence that describe something about a noun, it might not be right before the noun. It might be in a different part of the sentence. So tip, the adjectives may and frequently do appear between an article, the, a, or an, right? Those were 3 articles from the previous screen, and a noun. So if you look at our first 2 examples, you see the, which is an article, handsome, which is an adjective, and man, which is a noun. Based on my tip, we can assume handsome is the adjective. So again, adjectives describe something about the noun. A verb, this would be one if we were in class, you'd most likely be able to tell me, oh, that's the verb in the sentence. So the verbs show action or the state of being of something or the occurrence of something. In the first example, we have the woman was quieting the man down. I give this example specifically to show you that sometimes there are more than one verb in a sentence, and we will look at why that is and what that is when we get to syntax. But the example is just strictly to show you that in the sentence here, the woman was quieting the man down. Was and quieting are both verbs in that sentence. In my next example, the man jumped the fence and he left the wedding. Here we have a sentence with basically two clauses, right? The man jumped the fence, he left the wedding. So here's one sentence, though, that has 2 verbs again. We can give a simple sentence like the man, on the previous slide, I said the wedding was quiet. The wedding was quiet. That's a very simple sentence, and was is the verb in that sentence. Basically, you're looking for the word that's describing the action. So the man jumped the fence. Jumped is the action, right? Or the state of being. Um, the wedding was quiet. The state of being is was. Um, so basically, your tip is the verb is something that tells us what the noun or pronoun is doing. The verb is telling us what the noun is doing in the sentence. Again, we'll go into pronouns into syntax. An adverb, this is the last of the four we're going to look at right now. Adverbs are a little crazy, and oftentimes people think they're adjectives. So here's a basic definition you can work with. An adverb can modify everything in a sentence, but not a noun or pronoun. Okay, so basically you can find an adverb anywhere in a sentence, but you're not going to find it right before a noun. Because what's right before a noun? If something's going to exist before a noun, it's either going to be an article, the, a, or an, or it's going to be an adjective, like the handsome man, okay? You don't have to remember all of this, but let me show you what an adverb can do. So simply, an adverb can modify a verb. So it can tell me something about a verb. The woman was sweetly quieting the man down. The verb in that sentence is quieting, and the adverb is describing something about that verb. She was sweetly quieting the man down. So that's how it can modify a verb. It can also modify an adjective. The very handsome man. So remember back through the last couple slides we looked at, handsome was an adjective and man was a noun. And here you have an adverb before the adjective handsome. The very handsome man. The adverb here, very, is telling us something about the adjective. It's telling us that the handsome level is not low. The handsome level is high. I mean, this is a good-looking man we're talking about, okay? So the adverb can basically tell us something about anything in the sentence. It just doesn't tell us about nouns, okay? And I bring that up to point out when I say modifying other things. So my third bullet point there, I say, yesterday I went to a wedding. We're going to look at stuff like this more in syntax, so you don't really have to pay a lot of attention to the third bullet point right now. But in that sentence, when I tell you that an adverb can modify anything in a sentence but a noun, yesterday is the adverb. And adverbs are interesting because they can go almost anywhere in a sentence. I could also say, I went to a wedding yesterday. Okay, so I can move it to the beginning or the end, but adverbs can move around quite often. Okay, so let's talk about tips for identifying an adverb. Adverbs can almost always, not all the time, but basically some of them can take the ly ending. So looking at my first example, the woman was sweetly quieting the man down. I know sweetly is an adverb specifically for the reason that it has the ly at the end, okay? Another tip would be that an adverb always modifies either the sentence or the adjective or verb. It modifies it by place, time, circumstance, manner, cause, or degree. Okay, so let's look at what our three example adverbs are doing. The woman was sweetly quieting the man down. So here I know we have the adverb sweetly, and that I know it's modifying the verb quieting. And I know that because it's right before the verb. Is this modifying the verb quieting by place? Is it telling me something about the place that the verb is happening, the time the verb is happening, the circumstance or the manner, cause, or degree? So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer is manner. So our verb is quieting. In what way is the adverb telling us about manner? So what's the manner in which the quieting is happening? Well, the quieting is happening sweetly. The woman was sweetly quieting the man as opposed to angrily quieting the man. So that's telling about the manner in which the quieting is happening. It's happening sweetly. We can look at the second example, the very handsome man. Well, we know that very is the adverb, and I know it's got to be telling me something about handsome, right? Because I know in this sentence that it's right before the adjective handsome, so it's got to be telling me something about handsome. Well, it's not telling me about the place of handsome or the time of handsome or the circumstance of handsome. We'll jump to that last one. It is telling me about the degree of handsomeness, right? So how handsome is the man? He is very handsome. I mean, this is a good-looking guy. It doesn't say the somewhat handsome man. Somewhat could also be an adverb, right? Because it's telling me about the degree of handsome. It's telling me that he's somewhat handsome. This sentence, though, is telling me that the degree of handsome is very high. And then our last example, yesterday I went to a wedding. Is this telling me about place, time, circumstance? Well, it's telling me about time, right? It's telling me that yesterday I went to the wedding. I went to a wedding yesterday. So those are two tips to identify adverbs, okay? Again, I want to stress that we're going to come back to these things, but I want in syntax, and you're going to get even more experience with them, but you should get a basic understanding now because you need to basically have an idea of these 4 parts of speech before or as you progress into the rest of morphology. So the parts of speech, again, we just covered were nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. Now you're going to go ahead and wrap up this mini lecture, and you're going to go to our next exercise on parts of speech. And you're going to look at these words right here, the same words from our word bank exercise earlier, and you're going to tell me if they're nouns, adjectives, adverbs, or verbs. And you're going to get 2 attempts at telling me this. The first time that you take the assessment, the exercise, parts of speech, I want you to do it with what you think you learned from this PowerPoint. So now that I've shown you what a noun is, an adverb is, an adjective, and a verb, I want you to go to that exercise and figure out if these words are nouns, adverbs, verbs, or adjectives, okay? Based off of just what you learned from this PowerPoint in this lecture. Depending on how you do, determines whether or not you need to take it again. You get 2 attempts at this exercise. The second time you take the exercise, so if you want to take it a second time, let's say you missed some points, you can use a dictionary, okay? And that's going to help you as well. But keep in mind that when you use a dictionary to look up some of these words, there might be more than one definition for them. Some of the definitions might say they're a noun and some might say they're a verb. So you need to look at how it's being used in the story. The answer for this always has to do with how is it being used in our story about tacos that we had earlier in that exercise. Okay, go ahead and finish up this recording and move on to exercise parts of speech.